Well, good morning and welcome to another Angling Direct Quick Bite. And this morning I'm going to show you how to make the most of your swim and how to find those spots within the swim that will get you an extra bite or two. So the simplest way to start is with the straight leading rod. So I've got my Spod stroke marker rod here with a big pit reel loaded with some 20-pound marker braid. Then on that I've got two rod lengths of 30-pound leader. And then quite simply on the end I've got a 3-ounce Korda marker lead on there, and that is loop to looped on there, so it's really quick and easy to take that lead off and swap from the lead to a spom when I want to do some baiting up. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to have a cast round with the lead, talk you through what I'm looking for and how to find it, and hopefully find some nice features in this quite intimidating 100-acre pit. Well, before I make the first cast, there's a couple of points I want to mention, and that's how important it is to have braid on this setup. The braid will amplify all the information you get when you're casting that lead round. It's so much more sensitive. And then because I'm using braid, you'll see I've got a finger stall to protect my finger if I am casting long range with this braid. That's so important. And the last thing, before I make that cast, make sure that the clutch on the reel is tightened right up, because if that spool slips when you're casting braid, even with a finger stall, you might have a bit of an accident. So the clutch is all tight. Let's have the first cast and let's see what we can find. So I've pulled the lead probably 10 to 15 yards back from where it landed, and straight away I found the back of a gravel bar. And how I found that, to start off with, the lead felt as if it was stuck. It was like it was in a slight snag. The rod tip pulled round, but with a little bit more pressure it started bumping up the back of the bar, and I can really feel that lead bouncing across the gravel. The rod tip is tapping, and depending on the size of the gravel and how harsh the gravel bar is, you can tell that by whether you get a slight rattle on the rod tip or some more defined bumps. So I'm pulling this lead all the way up. It is getting a little bit smoother now, but there's definitely a nice steep-sided gravel bar out there about 30 yards. So those nice rattly gravel spots, they're probably the most obvious spots to find, and they do definitely produce bites. But you might be fishing a lake that hasn't got gravel bars. You might be fishing an older state lake or a mere, and then you're probably just looking for what an angler would call a nice drop on the lead. So as long as you feel that lead tap down, you know it's not landed in weed or in really deep silt, there'll be a spot that the fish are happy to feed on. So I'm going to have a cast around the swim and see if we can find a nice firm spot that isn't gravel, and I'll talk you through what that feels like on the marker rod. There. So I got a nice drop on the lead there. It definitely isn't gravel because it wasn't a positive enough donk as the lead went down, but it is a nice spot. And as I pull this lead slowly along the bottom, unlike when I pulled it across the gravel, I'm not getting the rattle on the rod tip, but there is very little resistance. It's a nice smooth area of the lake bed, and it's definitely an area that I'd be happy to put my rig and hopefully get a bite or two. So the last type of lake bed that I'm going to talk about is exactly what I found out there. I've got a very subtle drop on the lead. I've only just feel it tap down, which tells me that that's probably going to be silt. And if I gently pull the lead back through the silt, there's a lot more resistance on the rod tip. Probably the best way to describe it, it feels like I'm pulling it through some custard. So silt can be a good place to fish. You get good silt and you get bad silt. If you bring that lead in and it smells horrible, it's probably not the best silt to fish in. But some of those pockets of silt will hold bloodworm, which is a real attractor for fish. So if you find some nice clean silt with a few bloodworm in it, that's a good place for a bite as well. So the next step, once you've found a spot that you're happy with and you want to fish on that spot, what you need to do is remember a marker on that far bank. There's a nice tall tree that I know that if I cast in line with that tree, at about 40 yards was where that nice gravel patch was. I'll feel that lead down, and there's a nice donk as it hits the bottom. I'll just put it along the bottom until I find the edge of that gravel. It's nice and smooth at the minute, but any minute it will start tapping. There we go, I'm getting a few nice little taps at the back of that gravel bar. So what you want to do now is pop the braid in the line clip to gauge the distance. And I know that if I hit that clip in line with that tree on the far bank, that's going to be exactly on that gravel patch. So I can now reel in the leading rod. I can change that lead to a spod, and I can use this rod to bait up with, and I can also use this rod to gauge the distance of my fishing rods. So I'll get the wrap sticks out, I'll wrap this rod up, then I'll wrap my fishing rod up to match that distance. And if you haven't used wrap sticks before and you want a bit of a more detailed information how to use them, Chris has filmed a video all about fishing accurately using the wrap sticks, and I'll put a link to that video in the description below. So I've swapped over from that straight lead to a marker float setup. It's exactly the same rod, braid, shock leader and everything, but I've got a nice big Korda marker float attached to the end of the braid, and there's a buffer bead that plugs over the swivel of the float, and then below that I've got a marker stem with a 3-ounce probe lead. So I'm going to cast that marker float out now, try and find that nice gravel spot, and explain to you how to find out exactly how deep it is by using this float. So exactly the same as when we were using the straight lead. I still feel for a drop. And then I just tap down on the bottom, and I'll drag the marker float and the lead along the bottom of the lake to find that feature that I want to fish to. It's all quite smooth out there at the minute, but any second we should hit the edge of that bar. And as soon as I feel the first tap, tap, tap of the gravel, I'm going to stop, and then we'll pop the float up. So there we are, that's just locked up. Where it's gone quite tight there, I'm on the back of the slope of the gravel bar, which is perfect for me. So rather than guess the depth, when we cast that lead out and we just timed how long it took for the lead to hit the bottom, with a marker float, you can loosen the drag on the reel, and then every foot of line that I pull off the reel, the float will rise a foot. So that's 1 foot, 2 foot. I'm going to keep going until the float appears on the surface to gauge the exact depth. And this might also come in handy if you're a zig angler and you want to position your zigs at the right depth. So you've no guessing the depth of the marker float. You can tell exactly how deep it is. It should be near the surface any second. There we are. That was about 12.5 to 13 foot deep. And when I cast that lead out, I thought it was between 10 and 12 foot, so I wasn't far out. But now we've got a visual marker float that we can see marking the edge of that gravel bar. And I might not want to use a spod all the while. I might want to get the catapult out or the throwing stick, and I can fire the bait round that marker float and then cast my rigs to the float as well. So it's another option for finding those features if you don't want to bait up with a spod. And hopefully this Quickbite has gave you a few tips how to find those spots where those fish like to feed, and it'll catch you a few extra carp this spring and summer.